OK, well, we've heard from the politicians and all today's big stories, but now it is your turn. We're live and we want to hear from you on Raw Politics. Your call. Good evening, welcome to the programme. This programme, as you know, is all about you. We want to hear your views. It is Europe's town hall. And first up tonight, it is elites versus populists. Who do you trust? It comes after Italy's Salvini launched this pan-EU alliance today, in fact, saying blaming bureaucrats and bankers in Brussels for killing the European dream. It's much the language we've heard from many other populists. Do you agree with them? Or maybe you haven't got a problem with elite rule, in a sense. Maybe the experts and those who claim they know best should be in charge. What do you think? Pick up the phone, give us a shot. Let us know what you think. Also, have you lost faith in politics? Because the political system and trust in it has fallen to a 15-year low. That's at least according to the Hansard Society. This has been carried out in Britain, and I think found that 40% of people said they would support new parties with radical ideas. Are you sick of the status quo? Maybe you're going to change your vote wherever you are in the European elections to a slightly more fringe party. And also, has Macron's nationwide debate changed your mind? We all know that he's had to deal with the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest protesters, over the last, nearly 6 months or so. He's been carrying out this grand listening tour, the grand debate. He seems to have won over some of his critics. What about you? Has he won you over? Have you changed your mind? You know what to do. Get in touch. As I say, it's all about you. Pick up the phone. It's free. You've got no reason not to. Look at that. Victoria and Philip sitting there in the basement of this parliament, ready to take your call. 00800 333 3702. You can email us at rawpoll@euronews.com. And we're also live on Twitter and Facebook. Join the debate online using the hashtag #RawPolitics. And we've got 3 great guests to join us over the next 45 minutes or so to talk us through this. We've got David Hessenhorn, who is the chief Brussels correspondent for Politico. We also got Esther Zatalan, a reporter with the EU Observer writing about Brexit and populism, and Sajid Karim, who is a British Conservative MEP for the time being with the European Conservatives and Reformists. And we'll be getting their views and indeed your views in a couple of minutes' time. But first, let's cross over to Euronews headquarters in Lyon for the very latest news this hour with Isabel. Good evening, Isabel.
And good evening to you, Darren. And these are our top stories. Well, the EU is calling for a humanitarian truce and the return to political negotiations in Libya as conflict between government and rebel forces continues to escalate. Fierce clashes are raging near the city's only functional airport between troops loyal to the internationally recognised government and rebel forces led by General Khalifa Haftar. More than 2,000 people have fled the ongoing fighting south of the capital, Tripoli, since last Thursday, but many remain trapped. British Prime Minister Theresa May will head to Paris and Berlin tomorrow as she hopes to persuade EU leaders to grant her another Brexit delay. Back home, Mrs May is continuing to struggle in her attempts to find cross-party support for the divorce deal she negotiated with the bloc. The Labour opposition party says talks so far have failed to yield any breakthrough. And plans are in motion for Europe's nationalist anti-immigration parties to join forces ahead of EU elections in May. The European Alliance for People and Nations was announced at a gathering of Europe's far-right parties, hosted by Italian Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini. Germany's AfD party, the Conservative Finns party, the Danish People's Party and Marine Le Pen's National Rally have all pledged to support the initiative. And those are our top stories. Back to you, Darren, in Brussels.
Isabel, thank you very much indeed. A full news bulletin coming up at the top of the hour. Now, tonight, we're asking you an awful lot about kind of trust in politics. Who do you trust? Why do you trust them? For example, Emmanuel Macron, do you now trust him, given this listening tour that he's had across France? is he listening to the public's concerns? French people today looking for lower taxation, or will you only trust his word when he finally delivers? But has his nationwide tour, the French president's nationwide debate, changed your mind? We want your views on that. Also, elites versus populists. Which one of those do you trust? Are you much more on the side of people like Matteo Salvini in Italy or Viktor Orban in Hungary? Or maybe, you know what, maybe you think Jean-Claude Juncker is not a bad guy, or Donald Tusk or Angela Merkel, and you think that politics should be more in their hands. And also, this big question, have you lost trust in politics and politicians themselves? This comes after a survey from the Hansard Society suggesting that the political system and trust in it has fallen to a 15-year low. Let's bring in the one politician on the panel to get his views on that. Have you found that? Have you found that politicians are a lot less trusted than they were a couple of decades ago?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's very clear. The political class, if I can use that term, because we keep being told that we are a class of individual, clearly has trust ratings which are so far down there today. I cannot think of anywhere in the European Union where you will get anywhere near a positive rating for politicians per se. But the interesting thing about it is, when people are asked about an individual politician that is attached to their particular constituency, they tend to have a different view. But when you talk about a generalized political class, they have a very negative view.
Okay. David, have you found that?
Well, there's no question, right? People have become very, very frustrated with traditional politicians, and part of that is the problems we're facing are the hard ones. The easy problems are out of the way. On the whole, people are living much, much better than they did 100 years ago, even 50 years ago. The big challenge for people in the political line of work is that those aren't the same folks. They don't remember what it was like to be their grandparents or great-grandparents starving when there were world wars. What they see is a situation where it's hard for people to save because interest rates are so low. These are problems that any politician struggles to solve. There are no easy answers.
Okay, so the bigger picture in some ways was easier when we're dealing with genuinely big difficulties. But there are different variations across the continent, aren't there, I think, in terms of trust in politicians, or at least their perceptions of politicians?
Absolutely, but I think David is right in saying that some of the issues that we're facing today, I think, are just out of reach for politicians. I mean, a globalized world when the financial markets are totally globalized and other sectors are global, it's very difficult for
one politician to kind of
in a
have
nation
all the
state
solutions
to come up with all the solutions that he might not have control of in his constituents. But also, I think it's a good incentive for people to get involved with politics and find out more about them, how they can have an impact on
Well, what do you
politics.
think at home? Do you potentially dislike politicians but actually like your local politician? Give us a call, 00800 333 702, hashtag Raw Politics on social media. And on that note, let's go to Steve in Hereford in England. Good evening, Steve. What's your thought on this? Have you lost faith in politics or politicians?
Yes, good evening. We actually lost faith 50 years ago in politicians.
Why is that?
I mean, you can't believe half of these, because most of them have got their own companies. They've got about 6 or 8 different companies.
There seems to be a delay on the line.
And you've got things like Macron. You can't put pressure on countries and to the universe and expect to get respect. You can't do that.
OK, well, just what we're sorting out the kind of slight interference on the line there, that's an interesting point, that people feel that politicians aren't just in it for politics, that they're in it for their own vested interests, and actually lots of them have got outside interests.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that...
And that's true of the politicians here as well, isn't it?
Absolutely, and actually one of the things that we're doing here, I sit on the Code of Conduct Committee, and President Tajani is actually sending a letter to every single MEP this week saying, look, the elections are coming up. You better make sure that you are not undertaking any activities that are not fully declared and that there is no conflict of interest taking place either. And in particular, be on watch out for interference from non-EU countries, because that's something that's seeped into our working mechanisms as well. But, you know, all of our national parliaments have the very same issues. issues, and even at a local level as well. We need to make sure we've got far more transparent processes in place that actually makes sure that people are declaring all of their activities, financial and otherwise, where there is potential for a personal conflict of interest.
Let's bring Steve back in, because I think he's still on the line. Steve, you were trying to make the point that you thought politicians, I think, had interests that went beyond just representing people. Is that right?
Yeah, well, that's it. You put people in a shop and ask Macron to buy a loaf, he wouldn't know what you was on about. He wouldn't know how much it is. It's not just him, it's other politicians as well. They don't walk about the street, they don't meet people, only when he's trying to stop somebody like the Yellow Vest or wants to be elected again. You never see him walking around different things like this.
Do you talk
about Marine Le Pen and different people like this?
Do you talk to your local politician? Do you see them?
If you do not listen to people, what will happen? You will get what the Yellow Vests do. Now, that's the only thing you can do. You can't just say to people, we're putting up your taxes, do this. Why not have a meeting with the top people? And the other thing you have to remember, you countries, we never had all this interruption and all these problems a few years ago when we was a common market. Why didn't France and Germany just leave things as they were? Everybody was going along quite well. There was none of this uprising, none of this racial stuff, absolutely none of it. Why did everybody want to change things? And one thing I must say, and I have to say this, 70 to 100 years ago, when we had this First and Second World War, we took all the migrants and everything. We flew rations into everybody. And now people like Juncker and Tusk want to punish the UK. Why?
Okay, Steve. That was certainly an eclectic mix of messages there, but yes.
I'll just pick up on one word, actually, that Steve used, and that was change. And I think that's the nub of the issue here. You know, change is a constant in history, but the speed of change is today such that our citizens really are finding it very, very difficult to cope. They are seeing their entire environments changing around them. They're seeing their opportunities changing around them. The economy around them is changing. Before they had jobs for life. Now they're being told they have to retrain every 10 years. An Uber driver is being told, you know, artificial intelligence is going to replace the work that you are doing.
David, you're being very kind, right? It's one thing to say you got to cope with change. It's another thing to say you got to cope with reality. I mean, let's keep in mind, Emmanuel Macron is an untraditional anti-establishment politician who ran and won as an independent in France. I was in London in the House of Commons just recently on one of the most consequential Brexit days and watched Theresa May doing PMQs, and the majority of issues that MPs were bringing up and talking about were local, yokel kind of stuff. I was just amazed on this momentous day in the country's history, talking about access for disabled citizens at a local train station, talking about local jobs programs. You know, virtually the entire hour of questions focused mostly not on Brexit, but on local concerns. So citizens have an obligation, too, to dial in and pay a little bit of attention and realize that it's one thing to rant against your elected officials. It's another thing to really pay attention to what they're trying to do. Most of them are in the business to make their country, their world, a better place. Are some of them playing games? For sure. Do some of them have other interests? For sure. But you got to identify those clearly rather than painting a broad brushstroke entire class with a criminal element there.
So David there, who knows more about politics than most people, thinks they're not necessarily all bad people and that you should trust them. What do you think? Give us a call, 00800 333 3702. Before I go to Paul in Staffordshire, Esther, there is this point, though, about change. Maybe a reason why people feel uneasy about the world and about their trust in politicians. But there are two groups. There are people who are embracing change and actually benefiting from a more globalised, changing world. And then there are another group who feel they're left behind. And that's almost become the kind of schism in politics, no matter where you are in Europe at the moment.
Yes, I think, although that's a bit oversimplifying it, and populists have been making this point that there are these two distinctive groups, and then and that populists are representing the people who are left behind. I think populists are bringing in important issues, and there are issues that need to be looked at. But I think that would be just too simplistic to say there are these two groups. Obviously, the people who want to take back control, who feel lost in the world. They also, politicians obviously have to reach out to them, but the answer is not to play on their fears and their anxieties.
Well, some say we got Paul tweeting in, British politics is an elitist group. There's a growing trend to move away from the two big parties. Several reasons are expenses, and that was a scandal a decade ago. Also ignoring the 17.4 million people who voted for us to leave. With that said, there are good politicians, but far too few. Let's go to Paul in Staffordshire. Good evening, Paul. What's your view? Do you trust politicians, or have you lost faith in them?
Well, if it's about a better world, and if we could change the way you're thinking and the way the world's going, and embrace the new world, I've got a faith in them. And if they change the way we're thinking, it's important to to make sure that we've got a brand new world for just to come. So we want stability in the world. That's what we want. A better future. That's what we want.
Yeah, but in saying that, do you think?
At the moment, there's nothing at all.
Do you think the current crop of politicians, whether they be in London or Brussels or elsewhere, are providing that stability?
Really. It's over in Europe and that, and what's happening in certain areas of Europe and the riots and that, and the important part of politics, you should listen to the public, listen to the voters, and that's a vital part of the politics, to listen to voters, and they'll vote for you again if you listen to them, and the services there, I think, And just politicians, if you listen, that's an important part of being a politician, to listen to them. So important, that is really important.
Paul, just finding this, but when you say they must listen to you, how do you expect them to listen to you? What do you mean? As in,
what I mean is if they ignore the voters, they ignore the people out there, and they go about their own business, and they don't listen to people at all, and they just ignore what they're saying.
Show me a politician who doesn't listen to their voters, who gets to keep their job. They get voted out of office pretty fast. I mean, what we see happening in the UK right now, for example, is democracy working too well. MPs represent their constituents, who are completely divided. Look at the poll numbers. The country is divided. The MPs are representing their constituents, and the Commons is therefore divided. Democracy is working just fine. So I think, Darren, your question is exactly right. Listen about what? How? With social media and modern technology, elected officials have more ways to engage with constituents than ever before. So what do you think they're not listening about? Because my sense is they are listening. Maybe you don't like what your fellow voters are saying because they disagree with you, but the politicians either listen or they lose their jobs. That's how democracy works.
But it's amazing that this has become kind of the, I don't know if I want to say the buzzword, but it's the word that just you hear time and time again, that politicians need to listen. Why is it? And it's, it's not just in the UK, it's in France and everywhere else. Every politician has been told that they need to listen more.
Yes, and I think what's interesting that we've been talking about Macron, and actually he's the one who has gone out to the public and has participated in debates and listened one-on-one to people. But I think what's important, as I said before, it's also for citizens to get active, to find out what is their politicians are actually saying. Are they really not listening? Are they saying what they want them to say?
And so are you listening?
It works both ways, actually, and I agree with both.
How do you listen to your voters?
Well, public opinion is one part of my decision-making process. I'm not going to take dictation from what I'm hearing directly from individuals, because I've got a whole host of other factors that I need to take into account. But then with that comes a responsibility. I have got to go back to my voters and explain my decision-making process and decision to them. They need to know why I may have arrived at a particular conclusion. It may agree with them, it may not agree with them, but that's one part of my decision-making process.
Okay, interesting point, and it's an interesting discussion, not least of all because many people are saying that their trust in politicians is at certainly a low that we've not seen for over a decade, and many of them turning to radical parties who've got radical plans. What do you think? We want you to get in touch with us. Pick up the phone, 00800 333 3702. It's free. You've got no reason not to. And keep sending in your tweets or indeed your Facebook messages using the hashtag #RawPolitics. We're going to take a quick break, but join us in a couple of minutes. We'll have more of your calls and more of the views of these guys too. Welcome back to Raw Politics, Your Call. Tonight we're asking you really fundamentally about trust in politics, whether you still have trust in your politicians, for a whole load of reasons, not least of all there's a survey from the Hansard Society, suggesting that it is at a 15-year low. Also, we've got Matteo Salvini suggesting that you out there don't trust what he called the bureaucrats and the bankers in Brussels for killing the European dream. Do you trust what he has to say? And what about Emmanuel Macron? Has he won your trust around with his nationwide great debate tour? We have got also 3 great guests, 3 for the price of 2 tonight. So a great range of views. Let's bring in another caller because you can pick up the phone, give us a call on the programme. We have got Mike from Plymouth on the line. Good evening, Mike. Do you trust your politicians?
Hello. Yes. No. I think that I don't want to take the conversation in a different direction, but I think the loss of faith in the UK has certainly been around. The failure. The lack of representativeness. That politicians aren't really representing the will of the people as expressed in the referendum 2016.
Well, sorry, hold on.
I think the people...
Mike, just hold on for 1 second, though. Do you not take David's point that actually the country's divided and thus its politics is divided, and so actually it is being pretty representative?
Not really, no. I think obviously the country is divided. I mean, that's self-evident, but there's a media narrative also playing out. We see, where certain policy outcomes, such as leaving the EU, are being basically catastrophized and demonized by the media. Like, for example, on Sky News, we've got a permanent graphic that says Brexit crisis. And,
we're not going to do down some of our colleagues, but do you not think it is a crisis? Even the government ministers are describing this as a political and constitutional crisis. Surely, it is a crisis for the country.
Well, I mean, I think what's happened, there's a crisis of representation. I mean, basically, the politicians, we've got an extremely pro-Remain political class.
Yeah, but who were elected? Who were elected?
Had the referendum outcome been consistent with the sort of particular policy views of those in government in the UK, Brexit would have been done and dusted. It's only because of opposition, concerted opposition to a particular policy outcome, that we're seeing this this so-called problem. And there's a media narrative that it's all too difficult, and that somehow the British people didn't understand what they were voting for, which is just really sort of paternalistic condescension, really. I mean, most people did know, and also most people knew there would be some financial downside.
Mike, do you honestly think this has been the easiest deal in history, as described by Liam Fox?
No, it's not. No, of course not. I mean, it's a ridiculous statement. It's obviously complex, and there are all sorts of agreements that need to be leaved. There are all sorts of levels of agreement which need to be achieved, on security, on tariffs, and so forth. And there's, different market sectors. It's obviously a complex set of things to do.
Yeah.
But
just stay there, Mike. I'm just going to bring David in. David, you're going to issue a point?
Yeah.
Our job as reporters is to keep things real. And let's be real and honest about it. The voters didn't know what they were voting for in that referendum. It is too complex. And just as an example, the suggestion that the EU is somehow an entity apart from the UK, instead of, after more than 40 years, an extension of the UK's own government and public services that it provides for its citizens, was just a myth. So, in fact, the rhetoric is very easy. To be against something is very easy. But policymaking is much, much harder, much more complex. That's what we're seeing in Brexit. But I want to answer what you were saying about Matteo Salvini, because you're repeating some of his points and nobody's answering this. It's really easy to be against something, but what the populists then have to do is come in and be for something. And when they're challenged in that way, you see how quickly things collapse, because in fact, there is no easy yes. It's very easy to say no. So when Salvini starts talking about the bankers in Brussels, and I don't know that Brussels was known for its bankers, but something we pointed out in Politico when the budget fight was unfolding between Brussels and Rome, and Salvini tries to say this is a fight between Rome and the EU, between Rome and Brussels. Let's look at the EU's top 6 jobs. Mario Draghi, the head of the European Central Bank, Italian. Antonio Tajani, the president of this parliament, Italian. Federico Mogherini, the head of foreign affairs in the EU, Italian. This was Italy versus Italy. Just because Brussels doesn't agree with what Matteo Salvini is saying doesn't mean it's a fight with the EU. Same thing about folks who are skeptical about their politicians in the UK. One purpose that the EU serves is that it comes in and might tell London, hey, wait a minute, you're making some mistakes. You're not following the rules. You're endangering your citizens with an irresponsible budget, say, and in providing some level of check and balance, which doesn't exist when you're so wonderfully sovereign and independent.
Yep. Mike, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah. Can I just say, I mean, I agree with some of what you're saying about the Italian, Italian, the sort of, the main discourse in Italy at the moment, and and also there's a lot of populist, obviously politicians locally, in nation states who are, are EU bashing, to gain sort of populist support in their own respective countries. So I'm not saying that's not the case. And I certainly don't believe all the pan-European evils are due to the EU establishment. But nevertheless, we're seeing a situation where, a majority of a nation state have in good faith sort of voted for a particular policy outcome. And that's being failed to be delivered. And also, we've got Donald Tusk, Guy Verhofstadt, and Michel Barnier, who are absolutely, most of whom I think probably don't want the UK to leave because we're net contributors, and we actually contribute a lot of money to the EU,
yeah.
and so so you're still pushing this notion that I think you're conflating two things. I mean, I think clearly the EU establishment is not responsible for all the things that are going wrong at nation-state levels, and we saw Greece. Greece have had particular problems in relation to their tax infrastructure and their tax administration, and they weren't paying their taxes.
Just quickly, they don't want your money; they want your civil servants because they're that good. Little secret.
Mike, thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to try and bring in some more people. You've definitely touched on lots of issues. Thank you very much for calling in, though. Much appreciated.
I've just got to make one point.
I'm just going to go to Carlos in 1 second, but no, you come in first, Sajid.
What people were presented in the manifesto at the time of the EU referendum is completely different to what is being delivered for them today. So this idea that the will of the people is not being fulfilled, I'm afraid, just doesn't bear out. And the issue is this: our democratic structures today are absolutely creaking under the fact that we are trying to apply a very complex situation of mature politics into a situation where it's a winner-takes-all mentality that has always applied in the UK. And the two things are today now colliding with
up against each other. Right, we're going to take a quick break here on Raw Politics. DMAD tweeting in saying the MPs have gone against the manifestos they were elected on. We need a general election to clear out the ones no longer representing their constituents. People still clearly motivated by Brexit. We've got callers on the phone from Poland. We're going to go into him and get the views of the people in the studio and you at home after the break. Stay tuned. We'll be back with you in a couple of minutes. Welcome to Raw Politics, your call. Welcome back to the programme. We're talking about trust in politics tonight. A lot of people animated, it must be said, though, by their lack of trust in politicians. What do you think? We want you to get involved in this programme, 00800 333 3702, or use the hashtag Raw Politics. And up next on the line, we've got Carlos from Poland. What's your view? Do you still have trust in politics or indeed in your politicians?
Hello, good evening. I think we can trust politicians the same way we were trusting 20 years ago. The issue is not the politicians, the issue is the lack of leadership. So there's a lot of politicians, but we don't have leaders, especially in Europe. So nothing against Juncker, Donald Tusk, but they're not leaders who are able to promote the European project.
How would you define leadership, I wonder?
Esther's asking, how would you define leadership? What do you think? What type of leadership would you like to see?
What are you missing?
Well, so leaders are essentially people who are able to drive or put people behind some ideas, some projects. And what we're seeing is essentially people in Europe live probably better than living 20 years ago, but because of this lack of leadership, people pushing groups of people towards an idea, people have misconcepts. Okay, there's people think that Europe or is stealing them or is causing issues on their life, but then they don't have nobody to show them the bigger picture.
And just,
I think this is a problem.
And just finally, Carlos, I mean, who do you admire most then? I know you said there's a lack of leadership in Europe, but if you had to point to one politician that you admire or you think has leadership, who would that be?
Currently, nobody.
No one?
No. Yeah, that's a problem. And this lack of leadership is being used or is being taken advantage by the populist movement to gain advantage, and that's why they're able to connect with so many people using basically pub conversation.
Okay.
Because there's nothing really special on their speeches. Essentially, there's pub conversation, and they're able easily, without much effort, to conquer voters and supporters. And essentially, Europe just got lazy and comfortable.
Interesting point. No, thank you, Carlos. Interesting point there. And Esther, actually, you know, when you look at people like Jean-Claude Juncker and Donald Tusk, they clearly, in some ways, are not as charismatic or have the appeal of some of the populist leaders elsewhere in Europe. I think that's a fair point to say, isn't it?
Yeah, our caller had a point, but I think you know, it's not particularly Juncker's and Tusk's job. I mean, Juncker heads the bureaucracy, if you will, in Brussels, and it's the nation state.
He goes around, you know, branding entire things the Juncker plan. If you're going to do that, you have to take responsibility for selling the message. Are people like Jean-Claude Juncker and Donald Tusk the best people for selling the European project?
No, I think it should be national leaders who should be selling that project. And I think it's what's interesting if you look at, for example, the Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte. He was quite critical of the EU before Brexit. The Brexit referendum happened during the Dutch presidency of EU, and basically right after the referendum, he understood that it's a dangerous game, and he committed much more enthusiastically to the EU project.
You have to ask how much time these folks spend listening to politicians like Donald Tusk give a speech, who recently I watched set Romania on fire with a speech in Bucharest that he gave entirely in Romanian. Angela Merkel in Ireland last week talking about how her own experience with what it means when borders disappear, having come of age and grown up in East Germany under communism. When Tusk talks about his love of the Beatles, you understand that unlike what the caller was just suggesting about him wanting the UK in the EU because of its money, you understand that the UK for Donald Tusk represents freedom, represents democracy. I think some of these leaders are more compelling than folks realize. You have to spend time watching them. They do come across as a little bit boring at some of these EU summits, but when you listen to them speak, some of them have very compelling messages to say. I don't think anyone can accuse Angela Merkel of lacking leadership skills.
Well, that one caller in Poland, Carlos certainly did. We've got Adrian on the line from Rotterdam. What about you, Adrian? Have you got trust or admiration in your politics or your politicians at the moment?
Not so much.
Why not?
I'm a little bit sad.
Why not?
I'm a little bit sad what's going on.
You're a bit sick. Why is that?
Because there are no solutions. There are no ideas. Everything is going worse. Nobody take the lead. I'm very disappointed about politics.
But Adrian, is it getting worse? You've never been wealthier, almost certainly. You're wealthier than any previous generation. You've more opportunities. You're healthier. How are things getting worse?
I see everything is going worse. If it is,
but it's not, though.
On the social scale.
Adrian, do you honestly think that your life is worse than your grandparents? Honestly?
I'm good, I'm fine, but I'm not better. I have a lot of stress every day, for example. And what you are seeing is that a lot of youths now are going with a backpack to the forest or to the Patagonia because they cannot cope with it anymore. If you see in the UK, for example, young people living in the streets don't know where to go, living by the parents till 40 years because they cannot afford it. Are we going ahead or not?
Okay.
65 years ago, my salary was 110,000 guilder a year. My company was making good profit. And if I want to get a job today, after 70 years, I can get probably maybe 40, 50, 60 euros an hour.
No, I mean, it's an interesting point. People clearly feel that pressure, particularly financially. Adrian, thank you very much indeed. Just really quickly, we do hear this. People don't feel it. You might be able to tell them, but they don't feel that life's getting any better.
Yeah, I mean, there is this perception out there, and it is then played upon as well. You know, I mean, the raw politics, there's basically two ways to conduct that. Either you bring people together and serve, or you divide and rule. And what worries me here is that the populist narrative is all about turning different parts of our populations against one another. It's not about bringing people together and addressing the issues. It's to try and create exactly the sort of mindset that has just been demonstrated, because that then allows a strong man to come along, or a strong woman, and to divide and therefore rule.
Well, as much as we're appealing for it, and if you do trust your politicians or have faith in them, or even find them that they've got leadership qualities, we also want to hear from you, because at the moment, no one out there seems terribly happy. You know what to do. Pick up the phone, 00800 333 3702. We've got about 5 minutes left. We're ready to take your calls. Stay tuned. We'll see you in a couple of minutes. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Your call tonight, we're asking you about trust in politicians. Have you lost your trust in them? And on that note, we've got Robert from Bedfordshire on the line in England. Good evening, Robert. What's your view? Have you lost trust in politics?
Yes, I have lost confidence. 2.5 years ago, the vast majority of the parliamentary members voted in favour of leaving the common market. Here we are 2.5 years later, and absolutely nothing has happened. The politicians have all disagreed amongst themselves, probably because far too many of them are lawyers, because the lawyers seem to be taking over. And the latest fiasco is for a party politician of either party trying to put through an act which means that we cannot leave.
Okay, so...
It's ridiculous to state that we will have to go into the elections, because what is the point? And if we go to referendum and then have a further customs union, there's no point in leaving in the first place.
Okay.
I voted to stay
but you
many years ago when there were 6 countries. There's now 28, which is far too many, and they can't work together.
Okay, Robert, thank you very much indeed for that. You know, we try and move away from Brexit. We keep coming back to it. But fundamentally tonight, what again is demonstrated, at least from the people who want to call in, they just don't have trust in our politics or politicians.
The issue to me, as a politician that's having to deal with the current circumstance, is this. I have got constituents that are going to lose their livelihoods if we deal with this Brexit situation in a certain way. And therefore, I will do everything in my power to make sure we do not allow that to happen. And if it means that the whole process has to be delayed in order to protect the livelihoods of my constituents, then that is what I will do.
Okay, Dave, is there anything we can take away from tonight in a big general narrative?
People in the UK are very unhappy about Brexit. It really has become a proxy for something which I don't think is quite fair, right? The issue of populism and its rise across Europe is a very serious one. Brexit is its own special problem. We can go back and ask why, you know, David Cameron agreed to do a referendum on a simple majority on an issue so big that in most circumstances you would need a constitutional majority, a 2/3 majority to do. I think what you hear is a lot of disaffection, but let's separate that grind of Brexit from what's really going on in Poland, in Italy, in Hungary, which is a different kind of populism. And there again, democracy is working. People voted for Viktor Orban. Whatever you think of him, he's the leader of his country, and he's successful and been successful on certain issues.
Okay, well, on that note, we're going to have tonight's last word. And I'm going to give this to the former President of the United States, Barack Obama, who at the weekend in Germany said, when we hear that young people aren't voting or participating, we say to them, you would not let your grandfather or grandmother decide what clothes you wear or what music you listen to, so why will you let them decide the world you're going to live in? So, you know, that's a message to young people. If you're not happy, potentially get out and vote. Thank you to our guests tonight. It's been fascinating. To you at home for watching and for phoning in. We'll be back again tomorrow at the same time. Until then, good night and goodbye.